Hi everyone, we're going to start in just 1 minute. We're going to start at exactly 3 p.m. We've got 160 people coming today, so we're going to just give them a little minute to make sure that everybody's here. Now, a couple of things about the event. If you've got questions, drop them in the comments and I will answer those comments. I will answer those questions at the end of the event. So drop a comment at any time. I can see the comments on another laptop and I'll respond to those at the end of the event. So if you've got questions straight away that you're thinking of, by all means, drop those in the comments right now. So we're just going to give it a minute. That's 3 o'clock. We'll give it another 30 seconds and then we're going to start. The whole presentation should take about 25 to 30 minutes. And then if we've got questions, we've got time for that. Now, I do hope that you stay until the end. Obviously, I've designed it so that hopefully you're going to love the information I'm going to give you. But at the end, I've got a great offer for you, a great free offer for you that hopefully you'll want to take me up on. Okay, so we're at 3 p.m. We're just over 3 p.m. So I'm going to get started. So this is for you if you're someone who is involved in housing association, or indeed you're involved in any project-based environment that you're interested in getting faster flow. So the things that I'm going to talk about today will apply obviously to housing voids, but it would also apply to things like claims environments, small changes in software development. It would apply to things like even legal firms, casework environments, anything where there are multiple people involved in the process and it takes a long time. It goes through multiple handoffs. Now, this particular case study is about a housing association where we were also working with a local authority, and the objective that we were given was, look, things are taking way too long and also our costs are spiraling out of control. A little bit about me though, first of all. Stuart Corrigan. I worked for Vanguard, for John Seddon, for 20 years. And my very, very first job in working in housing and working and doing systems thinking in housing was in housing voids. And I found it a particularly complex job to solve. That was until I started to think about it as a project-based system. If you think about it like that, actually it becomes very simple to fix. So why voids and why voids now? Well, we did a recent survey. We surveyed 75 housing associations, and what they told us was the time to turn around a void, especially since COVID, has increased dramatically by 250%. It's gone from about 10 days up to 30 to 40 days. Now, if you take a small housing association with, let's say, 400 voids, I reckon that's costing them about an extra £280 per month, about £125,000 a year in lost rent. So what are the issues? Well, the issue is that there are less trade operatives about since COVID, less trade operatives willing to do multi-skilled roles. We find that in many RSLs. A lot of challenges with utility companies in switching from one tenant over to another one. And also lots of challenges with more and more homelessness. In one council, we found that their homelessness bill for B&B has gone up by £960,000. And we're doing a massive project with Glasgow City Council at the moment, helping them with their homelessness. We've been doing that for the past couple of years now. So again, we understand the relationship between homelessness and also between that and housing voids. So let's say you've got this problem. Where do you start? Well, the key is, how do you think about the system? If you're a leader, where is the point that you're going to stick the lever in order to get the biggest amount of change? Well, the big issue is capacity. Now, would you agree that if you had unlimited or more capacity, that would help? right? But you see, the challenge we find is that most RSLs are losing substantial amounts of capacity based on the way that they think about the design and management of their voice system. So you may already be losing capacity because you have less operatives. You may be losing capacity because of utility suppliers, but actually there's a massive opportunity for you to get much of that capacity back if you think about the design and management of your housing voice system differently. So what we need to think about is, if we think a certain way about how to run a voice system, that gets converted into a set of policies and principles and practices that creates the system, meaning process, policy, measurement. All of that makes up a system for how to deliver something. And that translates into performance. Now, I must have in my career worked over 50 to 60 different councils and housing associations doing housing voice, housing repairs, and allocations. And what I find is that the big thing that we've all been taught to think about is keep the operatives busy. In other words, there's an assumption that productivity directly relates to capacity and directly relates to faster time to deliver a void. That's the assumption. Actually, what I've found from studying many of these systems is that the relationship between productivity and delivery is actually an inverse relationship. The more that we think productivity, actually, the worse the system becomes. It's a totally counterintuitive way to think about the delivery of a void. Here's what's happening if we think keep the operatives busy. Well, number one, because we're thinking productivity and we're also using typically service level agreements, which by their very nature are arbitrary, do it in 5 days, 10 days, 15 days. There's no science there. It's just a number that we think would be a good number, right? Well, if something breaches the SLA, what we tend to find is it gets left. If it's as long as we do 80% within the SLA and the other 20% fall out, well, they get left. And actually, they're the difficult ones. So what we tend to see is, because we're trying to keep the operatives busy, they're focusing on the easy ones to hit the numbers, to hit the SLAs. The difficult ones get left, and that means it ends up costing more. The other thing is because we're focused on productivity, what happens is we're sending the operatives out to lots of bits of voids. Let's keep everyone busy, do different voids, work on lots of voids all at the same time. And actually, what happens is they all get delivered late, because rather than focusing on completing a void, we're focusing on keeping the guys and the girls busy. It also means that we release way too many voids. So there's way too much work in the system, which again means lots and lots of multitasking. And if somebody's working on a void, and as I say, it becomes a challenging void, well, that gets left, because that means if actually what we try and do is unblock that void, we're losing productivity. And again, you have operatives working on more than one void at a time. Another thing that we find is that unless you really run your allocation system with your void system, what's happening is priorities are shifting all the time, and you have this stop-start mentality where many times I've been working on jobs with operatives and they're told to stop, jump onto the next void because that one's easier, or it's keeping them busy. And the other thing that happens is actually an overspecification of the void standard for the customer. In other words, rather than trying to really understand what matters to the customer, sometimes doing a little bit more, but more often than not doing a little bit less, actually we're doing this standard approach, and it means that everything takes longer. So we have to move away from this productivity mentality, and we have to think something else. Now, I am actually going to give you the answer as to how to solve that, but the key thing that we bring to the party is, yes, giving you the answer. And by the way, I've been criticised widely for giving people the answers to solving these systems and also trying to boil things down to 4 or 5 principles or policies that are going to make the difference. Of course, that criticism comes from other consultants and other consultancy firms. But what my clients say is that actually, now that we know that you know what you're doing, we're going to have a go. And sometimes they have a go and they get a great result, and that's amazing. And often what they say is, we have a go, but we really need you to help us to implement. And also from a leadership perspective, what leaders tell me is, look, I've got so many things on that I just need 3 or 4 things to focus on. So that's what I'm going to give you today. I'm going to give you the answer, but I'm also going to try and make it simple for you. Now, the key here is answering 3 questions. Number 1, what are we going to change? Number 2, what are we going to change that to? And number 3, how are we going to cause that change? Well, to answer question 1, the job of the leader, I would argue, the absolute superpower is to know how to study a system and make the inputs or the rules of how the system works, make that absolutely visible and be clear on the outcomes and understand the relationship between the inputs and the outputs. So if we're going to start by studying, first thing we have to be clear on is, what is the purpose of the void system from the customer's point of view? I'm going to go into this in a second. Second, we have to have measures related to purpose. Therefore, we know how we're performing. Now, the third thing that most people really fall down on here is understanding the method by which we do those voids. In other words, if we have clear purpose, clear measures, and a clear method, then what we can start to do is we can start to experiment with methods to influence the measures and therefore better attain purpose. So let's start by understanding purpose. Now, the key here is to, again, let's keep this really simple. But the first principle is, what is the purpose of the void system from the customer's point of view? Having worked in lots of local authorities over the years, one of the biggest challenges I found was that when we talked about purpose, the purpose was always, how do we meet government targets? You know, if you look at public sector planning, one of the challenges there is the 57-day target means that planners are focused again on how do we do the easy ones to hit the 57 days, and then what happens is the more difficult ones get left. I studied 4 public sector planning systems as far north as Shetland, as far south as Lincolnshire, inner city, remote, rural, and what I found was, because the purpose was all about meet the government SLAs and standards, as such, every single one of them performed the same and every single one of them had the same dysfunctional behaviour. So purpose is not keep the operatives busy. It's very counterintuitive. Actually, if what we do is we get our purpose right, the operatives are going to be busy anyway. And it's not to hit the SLAs, because by their very nature, they're arbitrary. And if what we do is we focus on the SLAs, we're going to drive 2 behaviours. One is student syndrome, which is, if you remember when you were at university or college, and you were asked to do an essay, and many of us went home that night and got started on the essay, versus how many of us said, you know, we've got 2 weeks to do that, and got started the night before. Or Parkinson's law, which is work expands to hit the target. So we must not make the purpose hit the SLAs. And also, let's try not to make the SLAs look better by counting working days. So I've been in many, many sessions with leaders over the years, and we've had this big debate about purpose. And it's really simple. It's about 2 things. What are you trying to do from the customer's point of view, and how are you trying to do it? That's your purpose, then you can measure that. So refurbish a void, that's what we're trying to do, to the right standard for the customer, quickly and efficiently. So what are we trying to do? Refurbish a void to the right standard. How are we trying to do it? Quickly and efficiently. There are 4 things that we can measure. How many did we get asked to do? How many did we do? Did we do it to the standard, yes or no? How fast are we doing it? And how much is it costing us? So the first thing we then need to do, again, is very counterintuitive, is have measures related to purpose. And what we want to understand here is our actual capability to deliver purpose, not what we want it to be, not percentage against SLAs, not averages, not working days, and we also want to understand variation. In the hundreds of companies that I've worked with over the years, this is one of the biggest areas that they fall down on. That they're looking at averages, so they're not understanding the true variability in the system. They're looking at percentage against SLA, which doesn't tell them anything at all about what to change or what to improve, and they're trying to make it better by looking at working days rather than actual days. What I've found with speaking to thousands of customers over the years is, as you know, they don't at the weekend stop thinking about when they're going to move in or when they're going to move out. Just because we don't count it doesn't mean the customers are not thinking about it. So let's think about these measures. Number one, refurbish, avoid. So the first bit of data we want to get to understand how the system is performing today is how many are offered versus how many are actually delivered. And we want to run that graph. So we want to see input versus output. Now here's a big clue. If demand and supply, if input and output match, then that's telling you actually have loads of capacity. It means that you have the capacity to flex, and it means actually what's happening is this thing, which is Parkinson's law, work expanding, or the SLA's driving student syndrome, is meaning that actually what's happening is that people are only working to the demand that comes in. So if you see a profile that looks like this, where in versus out, it is really following the same pattern, and you know that you have more capacity in the system than you think you do. So that's the first bit of data we want to get. How many offered per month, how many done per month, and we'll typically look at that over a year. Now, the next bit of data we want to get is we want to get the end-to-end time for delivering a void. So again, we'll typically take data over the past 12 to 24 months. We take one void as one data point. We're not looking at averages. Each point is an individual data point, and we want to look at oldest to newest, and we only want to look at closed voids. And what you'll see is a graph that looks something like this. This is a control chart. And what this does is this gives us a confidence level that if somebody says to us, when will the next void be delivered? Well, as you can see, the average here is 6.5 days. But actually, the end-to-end time is 22 days or less. Not only that, because there's so many data points in this system, it's a big, massive housing association, there are lots and lots of voids that are above the line for 22 days. So the way to think about measures here is if somebody was to call in and say, hey, when will I get my voids? Because of the degree of variability in the system, the only answer you can give is 22 days or less. What you cannot say is where it will fall within those 22 days. Now, again, the RSL and the local authority that we're working with in this particular case, actually their upper limit was nearer to 75 days. So again, if somebody says, when am I going to get my void? The only honest answer you can give with a 99% confidence level is 75 days or less. So the first thing to think about is let's be clear about purpose from the right perspective. Second, let's get measures related to that purpose. And then third is let's make sure that we look at those measures and we load those measures in the right way so that it shows us trends, so that it shows us variability. And it also shows us when we make a change, have we made the system better or worse? You know, a lot of leaders that I work with, when they take on their new job, the first thing they do is they'll do a restructure. And I always ask them, well, did you make it better or worse? And they don't know because they didn't understand the system's true capability against its purpose before they started. And therefore, they don't know whether what they did made it better or made it worse. So we've got our capability data. We now know what's happening, but we don't know why it's happening. So here's the next piece of data that you need to go and get to understand why the void is taking as long as it is. So the first thing we want to understand is how much WIP, how much work in progress is in the system right now. In other words, how many voids are currently being worked on right now? How many are open and can be worked on right now? And what you tend to see is that there is way too much work in the system. And as such, what that's driving is it's driving this behavior around do the easy void, leave the difficult void, multitasking cross voids, doing lots of little bits of voids rather than actually focus and finish a void and get it out to the market. Second thing you want to ask, you want to go around and you want to say to people, hey, what are the rules around what determines what void goes first? And what we've found here is that, well, let me give you the answer. The answer is you only have one rule. So you either do oldest first, or you do most rent, or you do green ones before blue ones. It really doesn't matter. But you have one priority rule, and that's it. You don't break it. You can have an emergency rule, but you only have one rule. Now, having done this survey over lots and lots of RSLs and local authorities, what I've found is that the minimum number of priority rules was 6. The maximum that I found was 24, meaning that actually there is no prioritization system at all. And what's happening is the order in which voids are being worked is constantly changing. So you want to gather those two bits of data, and you also want to gather the waste in the process, the problems when people are actually trying to fix the void. So here's how to do this. Number one, what to do is get a big wall and take your process that the void goes through and get a post-it note or some cards or whatever and put all the voids in a wall. And I'll show you a picture in a second of what that looks like. Then what you'll see is where all your voids are and typically what bit of the process they're typically getting stuck at. It will allow you to see how much work in progress is in the system. And the next thing to do is mark on each void on each little card or post-it note how long it's been in the system. Now look, you can do this digitally. But you know, when I started doing voids 22 years ago, what we did is we didn't have the digital stuff that we have today. Sounding like my dad now. And what we did is we put the voids on one of those T-card boards. So each void had its own little card, and then we put it in the board and we moved it along. It allowed us to see how many was in the system, how fast they were moving. And you know, here's an interesting thing. So when the digital stuff came along, I started to track the physical board against the digital board. Every single time the physical board won over the digital board. So a massive insight for me is have the voids live on a wall somewhere. Now here's a client that we were just working with in Chicago. Look at me, yeah, traveling the world, in Chicago, and kind of something similar. And when we put all their projects on the wall, the leader was absolutely stunned that they had so much work in progress, and also stunned at how long each project, in your case, each void, had actually been in the system. So that's job one. Do that, and you'll get a real clear picture as to how many things you've got live, how long they've actually been live. And the other thing that you can do is you can put a little dot as to how many times each void has been visited by an operative. And again, it'll be quite scary because you'll see that many of these voids have been picked up, put down, picked up, revisited over and over again, and actually still not finished. So, priority rules. And again, speak to everyone. And really all you're asking them is very simple, as I say, bring tissues, you may cry over this one, is you're asking them a simple question is, how do you decide which void to do first? And see whether or not you get the same answer from everyone. Now, there's a second question we want to know here, because this is a big challenge with voids, is you want to understand what is the process if you get blocked. Now, I'm going to give you a simple system for doing this, but what we find happens most in voids is if someone gets blocked, they stop, they go on to the next void, and now we have a system where we're not only multitasking, but we're working out of sequence. So get the voids on the wall. Second, speak to lots of people and ask them about the priority rules, what determines which void goes first, and you'll start to get insights as to what's happening in your system. Because what we want to do is we want to stop multitasking. We want to stop working on lots of little bits of voids. Now, here's a little exercise you can do with your team. And it really demonstrates what happens when you multitask. So sit your team down and ask them to get a pen and a bit of paper, and we're going to have 3 columns on the pad. And what you're going to ask them to do, first of all, is you're going to ask them to work horizontally. A1 square, B2 circle, C3 triangle. You're going to ask them to work across the way. Now, what this mimics is you delivering 3 voids, and it mimics you delivering those voids by working across all 3 voids at the same time. So you do A1 square, B2 circle, C3 triangle, right down to Z26, and I think it finishes with circle. Now, what you'll find is that it will take round about 3.5 minutes to do this exercise. What the people will also tell you is that when they do it, they find it challenging because they were constantly having to stop and rethink and restart again. So in the next iteration of the exercise, what you then do is say, right, now go A to Z, 1 to 26, and then do all the shapes. And what you'll find is that A, you'll deliver it in half the time, but not only that, the first void gets delivered in about a quarter of the time, the second void in half the time, and the third void, just as fast. In other words, what's happening is you're now delivering voids continuously rather than delivering batches of voids all at the same time. Now, having understood work in progress and priority rules, what we now want to do is we want to understand the process flow. Now, again, most process mapping systems really are not that effective. You want to understand in your process mapping system 3 things: the flow that the void goes through, the problems or the waste, and then the impact of that waste. Now, if anybody wants to get a process mapping document from me, exactly how to do this, drop me a DM. I think you'll need to be connected to me. Drop me a DM, and I'll email you a process mapping document that walks you through exactly how to do this. But remember, your capacity is determined by the amount of value work that you do, work related to purpose, versus the amount of waste. So over specification, under specification, rework, errors, duplication, multitasking, all of those things are consuming your capacity. And having worked in hundreds of service organizations over the past 25 years now, we find that generally about 60 to 70% of capacity is waste work. Can you imagine the opportunities that you have for cost savings, for improvement, for morale building, if what you do is simply focus on those processes and remove the waste from the processes? Now, what you'll find when you do this process mapping exercise is one of the problems is the utilities providers. Now, many of you might already know this, but one of the things that we're doing is we're using with one provider, I think it's OVO, they've got a little system called Help for Tenants, where basically they'll take the tenant from you, they'll try and speed up the process, they'll get all their power cards and all of those things, and they'll do all the work for you as long as the tenant then switches over to them. And we're doing this with a couple of housing associations at the moment, and it's really working well and taking a lot of the hassle away from the housing association. So we've got purpose, we've got measures, we've got work in progress, we've got priority rules, now we've got the process map. Now what that allows you to do, this is the master skill, what that allows you to do is to build the rules of how your current system works. In other words, build the inputs that are currently giving you the outputs. This is it, folks. If you can understand how to do this, if you can understand how to walk into any system, study it, and know exactly what to change, you can make that change super fast, and you can also make sure that the change you're making is the right change. So when we study voids, here's what we find. The rules are release all the voids into the system. And it's okay to know how many, not to know how many are in the system or where they are. The typical priority rules based on, who shouts loudest the day of the week, the easiest one, did they breach the SLA? Sometimes go for the easy ones, sometimes go for the difficult ones. And then measures are based on averages and SLAs. If blocked, stop, go on to the next void, keep all the operatives busy, have one standard specification, and just get started, even if you don't have all the materials. And when you put all of those rules together, those are the things that are consuming your capacity, and meaning that you're losing 50 to 60% of your capacity through multitasking, working on the wrong void at the wrong time, over or under specifying, and that's what's costing all the money. And when you think about it, it's really simple. So here are the new rules. I told you I'd give you the answer. Here are the new rules. Limit the number of voids in the system at any given time. That means that you're forced to work on the right void at the right time. If you're blocked, here's your new rule. SWGH, what does that mean? Stop, wait, get help. This is the job for your managers. Your job for your managers is not to sit in meetings. It's to be out there unblocking, making sure that the guys and the girls are working on the right void at the right time. All voids in player and visual, so that you as a leader can walk up at any given time, see where that void is, see where things are blocked, and say, hey, what can I do to help? One priority rule to determine which void goes first. Make sure your measures are based on variation and true end-to-end time and related to purpose. And the only resource that you should be keeping busy all the time is your most limited resource. So typically we find this is electricians. So what we'll try and do is make sure that we're sequencing the voids actually around the electricians, meaning that we're only releasing a void when the electrician is ready to go to that particular void. Because if they're the pace setter, if they're the slowest car on the motorway determining the speed of the motorway, what difference does it make if everyone else is busy? Now, again, this is very, very counterintuitive. But if you're the kind of leader that wants dramatic results, then step one is study what to change. Step two, having studied that will tell you what to change to, and then we get into how to cause that change. And here's an example of the same client. Once we'd removed WIP, once we'd been very clear on exactly what things that we're going to work on, and already they're seeing dramatic improvements in throughput because people are focused on the right thing at the right time. So in our housing association, what happened? Well, the time to reduce the housing void went from 77 days upper limit with all that variability to 20 days. Now think about it, right? Here's a big question. What's the value work in refurbishing a void? Maybe it's 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, but it's not 20 days, right? Therefore, if you think about what's the value work against the true end-to-end time, that opportunity for improvement is massive. So by reducing the time to get the void, and we can do better here, by the way, by reducing the time, what happens is rental income comes in faster. We were also working with a local authority, and because they weren't having to put tenants in temporary accommodation, we saved money there as well. As I say, we're doing a massive project, homelessness, with Glasgow City Council at the moment, and we're also working again with Europe's biggest Housing Association at the moment to improve throughput there as well. So results were 77 to 20, a saving of 720,000, and this is not just capacity saving, this is actual money in this case. And of course, this is only looking at voids. You also need to look at allocations as well to make sure that you're offering the right void at the right time. And what I'll do is I'll do an allocations workshop for you in a couple of weeks so that you can understand the relationship between allocations and voids. So here's the offer if you're interested. If any of this has resonated with you today, there's two things that you should do. One, you should join our group. Go to betterservicenetwork.com. Second, if you go to this URL, and by the way, go to the group, betterservicenetwork.com, and we'll repost this in the group, and we'll give you all the links so that you can go to the links and you can apply. We also offer, we do 1 or 2 a month where we do a free diagnostic for clients that qualify. So what does qualifying look like? Well, number one, it means that they're actually clear on the problem that they're trying to solve. Number two, myself or one of the team goes out and has to be on site. And number three is the leader comes with us and we do the diagnostic together. And you know, there's 1 or 2 outcomes from that. Number one, at the end of the diagnostic, you'll know exactly what to change. And of course, some people say, hey, would you help us with that? And some people say, hey, we'll have a go ourselves. But for you today, we generally charge about 7 or 8k for this. But for the people in the group, we'll offer you this for free. So if you're interested in the diagnostic, go to the link, go to the group. All the links will be in there. And just simply fill out a little form. That will come through to me. We'll jump on a call and we'll have a chat. Now, does anybody have any questions? If not, I'll close things down and I'll let everyone get on with their day. Okay, we have no questions. I hope you found that of value. I hope you will go and you will join the Better Service Network where we share all the good stuff all the time, all the how-tos, all the case studies. And I hope for those of you that this resonated with and you have a problem, you'll go to fragilebook.co.uk/housing voids and get in touch and we'll talk about the diagnostic. Have a great afternoon. Thank you very much.